Hey, going live today to talk about a brand new meta-analysis that just came out, in 2025 called, let me get the full title here for you, Sensory Processing in Individuals with ADHD Compared to Control Populations, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis. And I asked folks to vote on hot topics. This is an article that's been sitting on my desktop for a while that I have been so excited to talk about. And this is what people voted for. So I'm very thankful for your input. Hey, Amy, I think you voted for this article. So probably because you're like me, like, what is happening here in the brain with both of these disorders? So, by the way, if we haven't met, my name is Julie Hirschberg. I'm a neurologic physical therapist. I am a very proud owner of Reactive Therapy and Wellness. I'm in the Los Angeles area. We do physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, psychology, neuropsychology, yoga therapy, fitness for people with neurologic disorders. And this particular article really caught my attention when it came out because I see a lot of people, I do the screenings for our programs, and I see a lot of people who might have functional neurologic disorder, might have EDS, POTS, MCAS, might have long COVID, might have post-concussion symptoms, and they also have ADHD. Also, my colleagues, my friends, my family also have ADHD. This is something that I think a lot of us as humans, we're around folks that have ADHD or a neurodivergent brain. And we hear from people a lot about some of their sensory symptoms, some of the things that bug them when it comes to their sensory systems. And there's been all kinds of research in this realm of sensory and ADHD. And I think I was particularly interested because when I meet people and they're talking about their symptoms, the development of their symptoms, and they have other disorders outside of ADHD, I can really see in their timeline their neurodivergent brain and its needs not being met, and that leading to potentially to the development of worsening symptoms. So I think as a clinician, as a physical therapist, I'm really tuning into how can I maybe understand their brain, their sensory system a little better so that I can help them really live their life to its full capacity. I think the sensory system is a missing piece in many disorders, which is, by the way, we just finished a sensory boot camp for clinicians. We had over 300 people in this boot camp, which was phenomenal. That got me so excited. It just ended today. And the people that I met in there, the things they were doing, the questions they were asking, the resources they were sharing was so incredible when it came to the sensory system. And we had our boot camp leading up to us opening our doors to our Brain Bites community. This is a community for clinicians that are like-minded in kind of thinking, maybe even obsessing about some of the sensory system, not just the sensory system, all of the systems, but particularly in complex cases. And our doors are open, by the way, if you're a fellow clinician, send me a message. I'd love to chat with you about it. But we've been kind of really diving deep into the sensory system because of our boot camp, because of Brain Bites. We have a live Brain Bites session tonight, actually, on sensory processing in functional neurologic disorder. I'm so excited that Julie Maggio from Mass General is going to join me tonight in our Brain Bites group on this topic. So one of the first things I see this clinically. I see the comorbid existence of ADHD with a lot of different disorders. It turns out so does the literature. So I won't share these other articles because I really want to dive into this, but I'll put these in our newsletter this week. So if you're not on our newsletter, get on it. You can comment on the video newsletter. I'll send you a link. But there's an article with the prevalence of ADHD in functional neurologic disorder that's a lit review. And there's also a few articles looking at hypermobility and ADHD, as well as dysautonomia and ADHD. There are links definitely across the board. I'm seeing this clinically, but it's not just me, it's coming out in the literature. And if you're a fellow clinician, I'd love to hear from you too. I'm sure you're seeing this. So when this article came out, I was like, oh, maybe this is part of the link. Maybe this is part of the reason we're seeing some of these other symptoms in people. It's this really, what I'm going to say, beautiful, fabulous ADHD brain. So this is the article. It just got published in the Journal of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. Sensory processing in individuals with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder compared to control populations, a systematic review and meta-analysis. So let me give you some background here. By the way, this is free full text article, so you can download it, read it to your heart's desire. By the way, this group was from all over. So the head author is from France, UK is in there, and New York City, as well as Italy, by the way. So what a great group, right, to be looking at this. This was a large undertaking because let me tell you, they screened 10,750 studies. And of those, there were only 30. That's a lot of studies to screen, 30 studies, but with a lot of participants. So 5,374 participants. 23 of those studies were in children, 7 in adults. And then they went through and summarized the effect sizes in different sensory processing categories. So I want to talk about those categories here because they talk about this in the intro to the paper. So let me see if I can bring this up. Oh, it looks a little fuzzy, which I'm very sorry, maybe because I tried to make it small for the screen here. But this is the classic that we talk about when we talk about sensory processing from Winnie Dunn, which are these 4 quadrants. And by the way, this work, I certainly don't take any credit for it. This comes out of the fabulous OT world. Winnie Dunn, Jean Ayers, really large leaders in this realm of understanding the sensory system. And I know if I have fellow OTs on here, you're like, yes, like we learn this, we talk about this, but for my fellow PTs, this is not something that I learned, and I certainly wished I had in PT school. So here are the 4 quadrants. And they're broken up between neurologic threshold, high or low, and then the regulation strategy, passive or active. So there's low registration, sensory seeking. I can't even read these, which is so funny. I'm sorry it's so blurry here. But luckily we use this a lot, so I can just tell you about sensory sensitive and sensory avoiding. So in this study, they really looked at each of those components to see what the difference was between a collective group of people with ADHD and those controls. So what did they find? I'm going to share a few of their figures that go through this. And I think this one is the biggest. So most of the figures break down all of their research articles. So you can see the studies, how many people with ADHD, how many controls, and then you can see the standardized mean difference. So they put all of the pieces together. And then you can see here in this particular one, they were looking at sensory modalities of tactile processing, visual processing, oral processing, auditory processing, movement processing, and then body position. And then you see the little blue dots where you can see, I know that's tiny. I'm going to just pull it up in the article for myself here so I can read it for you. in at the bottom, you can see whether it's decreased in ADHD, that's on the left side of the line, or increased in ADHD. What you can see in these modalities, they were all increased in ADHD, but really only the ones with the larger increase really were significant. So that was the most significant ones by the standard mean difference were auditory processing, movement processing, visual processing. Those were the top three where they were the most different from controls. Now, not in this one, but in these other ones. So let me give you another one here. And let me pull this up. This is, let me see which one this is. Looking at, okay, yeah. So this is the first figure. It's funny how they like actually in the online and pulling it up, they don't actually label the figures. So they're very hard to know which one is which. But this, I believe, is figure number 1. So I'm going to use this as an example. So in the very first figure, they're looking at the effect sizes based on one of those quadrants. So the first one was sensory sensitivity. And so again, you can see all of the articles on the left, you can see the totals, and then you can see the mean difference. And what was found is that indeed people with ADHD had higher on the sensory sensitivity than the control group. And this was both in adults and children. Now, something that was really important is that the heterogeneity of this was really high. So that means people are very different. This shouldn't be surprising. And I think this is like one of the take-home messages for all of this is that while there are clear, I'm going to stop sharing this one, clear group means of differences, there was a lot of heterogeneity. And this really means we need a personalized approach for people. But on the whole, people with ADHD were higher sensory sensitivity, higher in the sensory avoiding. This was also adults and children. And it was very heterogeneous. Low sensory registration was also higher in the ADHD group. And sensory seeking was also significantly higher in the ADHD group. So each of those areas were higher than controls in those groups. What does that tell us, right? So it tells us that at least like on an average scale, there are sensory processing differences in people with ADHD. I don't think that's surprising to any of us that work with folks with these lovely neurodivergent brains, that it varies quite a bit within a group. But it may be that we're seeing higher than usual sensitivities in folks. Now, the other thing where they looked at a binary outcome. So these were studies that looked at just are people hypersensitive or hyposensitive. And this is what is really interesting. The ADHD population had an increased risk of being hypersensitive. They also had an increased risk of being hyposensitive. And that's kind of explained by the higher average in all of the quadrants as well. How can you have both, right? And this is so very important because a person can be hypersensitive in one modality. So let's say hypersensitive to visual input and hyposensitive to smell or touch, right? So maybe they actually need deep pressure and touch, and less visual stimulation, right? And I would say on the whole, as we assess people on an individual basis, we definitely see these individual differences between modalities. One person, a lot of people need a certain amount of touch and a different amount of smell, or a different amount of vestibular input. So individualization is a key. So what do we take home here? I think there's a few take home pieces. Number one is ADHD brains are sensory powerhouses, I would say, higher than in all quadrants, 1.5 times more likely to be on the kind of realm of hyper or hyposensitive than a neurotypical brain. This is a sensory powerhouse to me. And these are sensory superpowers to many people with ADHD who have a tremendous sense of hearing, for example, or tremendous visual sense, right? This is a powerhouse. It also means that there might be difficulty with the processing and the weighting of that information. It might go into overload real quick. And if you have met or talked to anybody with ADHD or worked with people, you know about just total overload and burnout in a neurodivergent brain. It's very real, and I think it has a large sensory component. Some of the things that were found in this study that were the biggest kind of triggers were sound, touch, and movement, but maybe not proprioception. This is actually something that I see clinically as well. I typically see that we can increase proprioceptive input, and it actually helps with overall regulation and processing. Now, this isn't to say everybody with ADHD needs proprioceptive training. That's not what it means. But if you test it out, this might be one of the first things that you would look at is proprioception and include it in training. I think it would be really helpful. In fact, I'm going to share one of my favorite little proprioceptive tools here. This is my weighted dragon. He is 5 pounds, which is like a good heft. And adding weight across the joint is a really great proprioceptive tool. My friend and colleague, Molly Parker, was doing this the other day with the weighted dragon when we actually had a dragon party here because we were reading the Empyrean series and we love dragons. But this extra weighted input on the head for proprioception, phenomenal. I love it. So anyway, also I just wanted to show you my weighted dragon because I love it. So sound, touch, movement, more triggering. Proprioception, not so much. So maybe we can use this from a treatment standpoint. Clinicians, biggest take home here, we should absolutely be screening the sensory systems if somebody has ADHD, whether that's their primary thing or whether I would say much more common in a neurology clinic that we're seeing that as a comorbid condition with something else. We should be screening. We should be treating. We should absolutely be incorporating treatment in as a way to help a person regulate their sensory system. And I think if you're seeing people with FND, EDS, POTS, ME/CFS, concussion, you should be asking about their brain makeup. Do they have a neurodivergent brain? Because that's something that you want to consider in the realm of their treatment, but certainly testing sensory processing, certainly incorporating it into treatment. The take-home message to ADHDers, if you have ADHD, if you have ADD, your sensory quirks are very valid. In fact, they are very much most likely due to the way your brain is wired. And those noise canceling headphones that you have, like, that is self-care. That is needed for you. It is not a crutch. It is not, you are not extra for needing those things. This is part of your beautiful brain. And you should advocate for sensory assessment and treatment. Not to say that it changes your brain. It's more that you know and understand what your brain and body need. We're not trying to change the neurodivergent brain. We actually want to understand it, acknowledge it, sing its praises, and give resources to the person so that they can function in everyday life. Another kind of like pro tip on the clinician side of things is personalization is absolutely key. What they found in the study looking at many patients is that they were all over the place. So even though there were these averages and trends, there were many different ways this could present. So this is why, like, doing something like the adult and adolescent sensory profile, this is what we use, really gives us a clear picture for that individual person. I would never assume to know what is that person's sensory makeup. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach. I wish there was. I know that make it easier for us, but this is very individual. And what is helpful and calming for one person might be really alarming and triggering for another. So this is really important for us to individualize. What a cool study. Very thankful to the authors for doing a whole lot of work for our benefit to help us understand on a really greater level. So looking at a systematic review and meta-analysis, we get beyond individual studies and kind of see a whole massive group of people compared to controls. And that's really nice to be able to see. And we've got some good information. So, I will put this article as well as the links to the other articles linking ADHD with functional neurologic disorder, ADHD with EDS POTS, and the link to the study that I just reviewed today. I'll include that in our newsletter, which you can just sign up if you're a patient at reactivept.com, if you are a clinician at reactiveeducation.com, and if you are a clinician and you love working with some of the most complex cases, the misunderstood cases, the people that quite frankly are struggling to get great care in our medical system, we would love for you to be in Brain Bites. So if you're a clinician, this is what we do. We hang out in the world of POTS and EDS and MECFS and concussion and F&D and pain and dystonia, because these are things that we weren't taught in school and end up with a lot of folks where they just haven't had good access to care. We talk about the sensory system. We talk about autonomic, motor control, lifestyle, psychosocial components, really to have a full picture, whole person view for our patients. So if you're that type of clinician, I would love to see you in our community. Our doors are open through May 14th, so just less than a week. And we are only opening our doors once per year because we're a small group. We really want to get to know each other and support you on a journey that you're going on. So thank you to my fellow clinicians that joined this live. Thank you to everybody who has reached out, asked questions, voted on this topic. Thank you so much. I'll be sending out the newsletter on Friday for my clinician friends, on Monday for everybody else. And thank you so much. Thanks so much for being curious with me, for wanting to learn all of this great stuff. And I will see you again soon.